in rethinking net zero, the question that's obviously up there is, why would you need to rethink it? Isn't it just obvious? Shouldn't we just get on with it? Shouldn't we just work our way to the conclusion of what's going to deliver the outcomes? That's it. Well, not quite. And that's because net zero is a deceptively simple concept. We need to go behind it and ask, what's the question to which net zero is supposed to be the answer? Now, again, you might say, well, it's climate change, isn't it? The trouble is that net zero isn't the answer to mitigating climate change. It contributes, but achieving net zero does not result in stopping causing climate change. And I'll explain why that's the case. But before I get there, let's just stand back and ask another question, which is, in mitigating climate change, how well is it going? After more than 30 years since the baseline of 1990, is it going well? Are we making progress? Are we on course to bring the processes of climate change to a halt? And the sobering reality is, not only is net zero not going to necessarily achieve stopping causing climate change, but we've achieved very, very little in over 30 years. It's going very badly. And there's no escaping that. It's not pessimism or optimism, it's just realism. And to see why that's the case, we have to work out, what the problem of climate change is. You may think you know what that is. You may think it's just, well, we just got to stop doing the emissions. No, that's part of it. But climate change is about the stock of carbon in the atmosphere. That's what the greenhouse effect comes from. It's the way in which solar radiation penetrates and bounces back with our atmosphere in between. And carbon is just a proxy for those greenhouse gases and their concentrations. So what we've got to try to do is stop changing the composition of our atmosphere. Now, because it's a stock, it's the product of two things: what goes in and what comes out. So we concentrate almost overwhelmingly on what goes in, and that's about emissions. Doesn't matter where the emissions take place, anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter really what the source is. We do need to slow down our injection of those extra bits of carbon into the atmosphere. Now, it also matters what comes out, because our natural world sequestrates carbon. Indeed, our natural world is made of carbon. You and I are made of carbon. And the sequestration process is essentially the natural capital of our planet, primarily the plants, extract the carbon, sequestrate it, and therefore reduce the stock of carbon in the atmosphere. So we're doing very badly because we're both not limiting the emissions seriously, and we're destroying the ability of the planet to sequestrate. And on that latter point, if you just want an illustration, look at some of those ghastly photographs of the burning Amazon. Look at the destruction in the Congo, in the Mekong. Think about what we're doing to the seas, the coastal margins, and think about the destruction of forests on a global scale. That's all part of damaging the ability of the natural world to sequestrate, to take out some of what we're putting in. Now, if you add that together, increased emissions and reduced sequestration, it's not surprising that the carbon concentration in the atmosphere has been going up. Indeed, it's been going up by about 2 parts per million for over 30 years. Just think about that. It's not a blip until you get to very, very recently. And even the recent blip is offset by the damage on the sequestration side. So, great financial crisis, not in the data, right? And if you look at the COVID lockdowns, yes, emissions came down. We did one of the greatest experiments in how to reduce emissions by stopping economies. But the sequestration side continued to deteriorate. So here we are on 420 parts per million, having come up a long way from the industrial levels. So if we want to really deal with climate change, if we want to make sure that we're going to stop causing climate change, we've got to do a lot on both the emissions and the sequestration side.